make it appealing. And that's why I like John Lovell. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all.
I'm not.
But I think it's Warrior Poet Society or something like that. But he started a channel. Like he has his own like channel that he's producing media on that's completely outside the mainstream media, and they're making shows. And that's what needs to be happening. There needs to be an alternative media, an alternative culture, because you can't just you're always going to be competing with Hollywood. And fortunately, right now, it's like with a little bit of equipment, I can set up. Your readers won't see it. I mean, your listeners won't see it, but I mean, I can set up this lighting. This is not expensive.
Yeah,
I can set up stuff that I look like reasonably professional.
Yeah,
and that wasn't accessible 20 years ago.
Sure.
To get lighting, you were talking about thousands of dollars and everything. But now you can produce good content from wherever you are, and with not a lot of money. And I think that's what really needs to happen. We need to let go of the idea of like, well, they shouldn't put that show on TV, or they shouldn't say this on TV or that on TV. It's like, well, do it better. It's up to you. Like, do it better. It's your opportunity. You just can't be mad at Hollywood for not doing what you want them to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Jack, not that it's this simple, but when you talk about masculinity and, let's say we've got a young listener, 14, 15-year-old male going, I want to grow up and be a man, right? I want to grow up and be that person that you talk about in this book. I know there's not a checklist, but what piece of advice would you speak about beyond, hey, read my book to get a good head start, but what piece of advice would you give them?
You have to put yourself in situations of pressure, and you have to surround yourself with other men who exhibit the qualities that you want to exhibit. Mm-hmm. And you have to, it's cool to watch young dudes do that too. I went to jiu-jitsu last night and I rolled with a dude. I don't know how he looked really young. I don't know how old he was, but he could have been anywhere between like 16 and 21.
Yeah.
To me, after a certain, they look all the same, but like that area, but he was still a very young kid.
Yeah.
And, I'm a pretty strong guy and I was a little more advanced but he's there. And he's doing it. He's like, I'm going to wrestle this big guy who, whatever, and he's there doing it all the time with a bunch of MMA guys.
Yeah.
And he's going to be a terror by the time he's like, 25.
Sure.
He's going to have a lot going for him, but you have to put yourself through that cycle and be the low man on the totem pole and put yourself in uncomfortable situations. And I've had to do it too. I mean, I started all this really late. Like I said, I was doing art and going around eating dinner in San Francisco and stuff like that. And then I started a lot of this when I was in my late 30s. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the lifting that I've done and a lot of the training that I've done and so forth. And man, the first time you step into a boxing gym and like don't know what you're doing, that's scary. And you need to do it.
Yeah.
Because it'll change you and it'll change how you perceive yourself. And the same thing goes with so many other things. So you have to put yourself around those guys who are winners, and then absorb that, and learn from it. Mm-hmm. And also, I think a lot of guys make the mistake because they hear that advice and then they go looking for mentors. And you also have to understand that as a young guy with not a lot to offer, you have to figure out what you have to offer to a mentor, because people have an entitlement mentality where they're like, I need direction. Give me direction. Tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And no, it's like, well, you have to go. I mean, like a medieval apprenticeship situation. Like, you go work for that guy for a while, or wax on, wax off, or whatever. You need to go and actually, what can I do to help whatever this guy's doing so that I can be around him and get that advice. Mm-hmm. You can't just expect dudes to spend their time. Okay, well, I'll sit down 3 hours to explain life to you. That's not how it's going to work.
Right.
And so I think guys who come to it with a humble mentality and realize that they need help, but also want to bring value. And you've run, you've had companies and done all that and been in business and so forth. And that's how you get promoted in life, right? I mean, you figure out how you add value.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think that's a lot of things that maybe younger guys haven't been taught. And that's something that they need. Figure out if you want, the extra stuff, you have to figure out how you're going to add value.
I like your point about putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. I've always done that to myself, from sports all the way through, even in my 50s now. I race Spartan competitively, and it's hard as hell. I did the Iceland 24-hour race up there, through the middle of the night. But you come out of those things stronger, and based on those experiences, you develop that strength that you can pull from in everyday life. When you're faced with a little situation in town, it's like, well, this ain't shit. I just conquered Iceland last week, or
Right.
tough match in jiu-jitsu or boxing or some of the things that you're talking about. I really think that it's critical that people do that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the only way you grow. I mean, that's the only way you get better. And people are, how do I develop confidence? Well, you have to go and do those things so you're not scared of them. And that's, and keep going forward and not always win, but keep pushing yourself forward. And realizing that you can handle that. Yeah. I mean, like I have to do it every day. You look over, I had to do the same thing that kid had to do last night. It's like there are guys at our gym who's like phenomenal. And, he's probably a purple belt or something, but it's beyond that. He's just really good.
Yeah.
and he's one of those dudes, like he'll tap me out 5 times in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so like I look over and he's like looking to roll and I'm like, and,
don't pick me.
I'm like, but he's like, you want to wrestle? I was like, all right. and so you go over and you try to do the best you can and keep him in a bad position for as long as you can.
Yeah.
And, everybody needs to have that experience often.
Yeah.
And it's not just young men. I mean, we need it throughout our lives because you can rest on your laurels. And a lot of older guys tend to do that. Like, well, I used to do that. I've already done that, whatever. But, if you haven't done it lately, you're still probably missing something. It's good for your spirit generally.
I like how you talk about or reflect into history in your books, mm-hmm. and convey that message to present day. You talk about wrestling and putting yourself in these tough situations, but you compare that to historical activities that maybe we're sitting around the fire as cavemen and we got to go out and kill our next meal for the family, right? And I'm not saying that was in your book, but they're great comparisons because we've lost that as society, at least in the bigger cities. What's interesting for me about Montana, most of my neighbors, they go out and hunt and kill for the meat for their family for the year. They're not going to Costco and buying some steaks. They're going out and getting an elk every weekend they can and bringing it back because they need to get it in the freezer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the parallels that you've made historically are really important for us to understand where we need to draw strengths from presently.
Yeah, I mean, we're the same monkeys that we've always been. We need the same things.
Yeah.
And we're designed to do that. Men specifically are designed to do that. We feel better about ourselves if we do that, and we feel more confident because that was any kind of primal situation. Like in my new book, it's called Fire in the Dark, and I kind of boil everything down to the idea of a campfire because everyone can understand it. Mm-hmm. And, if you go out far in the woods and you go camping, everything that you can't see around your fire is chaos and darkness.
Right.
You don't know what's out there. I mean, you might have a good idea, but you don't know. There could be some creepy homeless guy hiking through the woods. You don't know what's happening.
Right.
So it's the idea of having to create that safe space and keep an eye on it and so forth becomes very real very quickly, and we can still experience that. Mm-hmm. And if you use that as a metaphor for a lot of things, you can see how our consciousness evolved to a certain extent, and how our psychology evolved.
Well, and what's interesting about that too is that we've gotten lazy to not think that way anymore and taken our safety for granted. And in the last few years, probably the last 10 years, we've heard about random shootings and tragedies that have happened around the country that maybe they could have been averted if people were a little bit more in tune to their surroundings and their primal instincts of protecting, your fold or your people around you.
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely that. I mean, it could totally. I mean, I think with a lot of the shootings and so forth, I'm surprised they don't happen more often. Mm-hmm. To think that only like X number of people are going to go completely crazy, like in a society of like 300 million, like seems, it's amazing. It's kind of like, I think one of those old school commentators one time said, yeah, it's pretty amazing that cars don't hit each other more often.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it really is. I mean, it can happen constantly, but we do okay with it. But yeah, I mean, I think that also understanding, I think, is important that the bad things happen,
Mm-hmm.
and that is part of life, and you can't childproof the entire world.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I think is a major discussion all over the world right now, but obviously in America, there's what's going on is kind of a childproofing of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you don't leave your house, you're going to be safe. If you don't do anything risky, you're going to be safe, and you're still really not going to be that safe. But that's the way people, they're kind of overmothered in that way. They're kind of mothered by the state, that don't take any risks. And risk is part of life, and bad things happening is part of life. And that doesn't mean if something bad happens to, your family or somebody or whatever, that doesn't mean you have to change the whole world. That's just something bad happened.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that everything is wrong because something bad happened to you. And I think that's where we've had a lot of bad legislation and so forth come from people who had one victim experience, and then they put the victim out in front. And they're like, see this horrible thing that happened. It should never happen again. And it's a lot of hyperbole and ridiculous language. I think I've called it baby talk in essays, because, we're going to fight a war against poverty until there's no more poverty. Well, that's not real, and it's never happened in human history. So that's silly talk, like that, like let's talk about grown up practical solutions to practical problems. And realize that they're going to be outliers and bad things are still going to happen.
Yeah, interesting. I think the few lines you just said are kind of the meat of discussion and should be the meat of discussion right now, especially when you look at this pandemic. And look, everybody has their own way of approaching it. I have not worn a mask since day one. I'm relying on my own health and immunities and strengths that I've developed, and the protection of my own family the way that I think is important. And I avoid the places that are required to wear a mask. And let me give small caveats. I have had to wear it a couple times. I had to fly somewhere. I didn't have a choice. Yeah. But as a whole, me and my family, we do not wear masks. And that is just us taking care of us without getting panicked over what's been told to us. And I feel stronger for that. As a man and as the leader of my family, I feel like we've made good decisions and we've come out ahead in this thing. And I wish more people could have those perspectives for themselves and strive to be better humans, as opposed to, like you said, they want that protection they're all holed up in their house. It's probably a really bad thing.
Yeah. Because it only gets worse. And that's, without getting too deep into that, you actually are stronger physically because your immune system is better. Because that's, again, part of that thing was like, well, if I just cover myself with sanitizer 24/7, I should be good. And that's not actually how your immune system works. And like that actually destroys there's a lot of people saying that it's worse the second time around, or whatever, the second wave or whatever. And well, it's worse because you have a whole bunch of people who have no immune system now because they've been covering themselves with antibiotics. They haven't been out of the house. They aren't exercising. They haven't been in the sun. They're vulnerable. You're making yourself weaker.
Yeah.
And, it's like if there was, Ebola going around and maybe I'll stay in my room for a week, but it's not that, so we don't need to do that.
Yeah. I got a few more questions for you. Are you concerned about the masculinity of men in the future and where we're heading, especially if this election, flows through as it's suggested that Biden's going to be our next president? We saw some losses in Georgia in the Senate, and I'm not saying that Democrats and Republicans can't both be, masculine, but I do feel some of the agenda of the Democratic Party really kind of evens that playing field of men and women. They've already taken a woman and a man. I don't want to go down that road yet, but are you concerned?
Yeah. Well, that's my job. That's why I'm to do what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been concerned for a long time. I actually started writing about one of the things that made me write for a wider audience than what I was writing for originally was actually dealing with I was writing on a blog, like a men's rights blog for a while, and hearing the stories of men who